Have you ever heard of hashtag van life? So begins Nancy Drew Diaries number 27, Vans and Villains, published January 20th, 2026. That's right, this year. If you couldn't tell from the premise, this isn't your 1960s Nancy Drew. As soon as I heard what this book was about, I knew I had to pick it up and read it, because that is just... I had lipstick on my teeth. Mortifying way to open a video. Anyway, I just had to know what was inside the covers of this bonkers premise for a Nancy Drew book, and I can tell you now, it did not disappoint. This book is ridiculous. For one thing, this book not only sees Nancy Drew and her friends experience hashtag van life, which, by the way, is how they describe it consistently throughout. Hashtag van life, one word. No van life, never without the hashtag. The hashtag stays on. But it also sees them becoming social media influencers. And not just any form of social media, it appears to be a version of TikTok. Actually, it's more like Instagram, but if Instagram had started out as a video app and then introduced photos, so like the opposite. Because it's like TikTok in that you post short form videos, but they can also post photos. It's called vids with a Z at the end. Of course, because despite this painfully current premise, some of the ghostwriters of this book are hanging on to the millennial Z with their cold, dead hands. Although I don't exactly know the identity of the ghostwriter of this book. This is one of the ones for which it hasn't been revealed, but I think a lot of the recent ghostwriters have been millennials, so that is my assumption. I also don't think that, like, a 60-year-old man is writing a Nancy Drew book about hashtag van life influencers. Forgive me if I'm wrong. This is actually only the second Nancy Drew Diaries book I read, and the previous one, which I've covered on the channel, by the way, if you're interested, felt like a lot more traditional. Yes, it had some, up-to-date, current references and content, but it was not exactly hashtag van life, you know what I mean? The premise of this entire series, by the way, if you are not up to date with the Nancy Drew books, and I will forgive you for that, like, my entire personality is Nancy Drew and I am not caught up, but this series is, exactly as the title would suggest, it's styled as a diary from Nancy, so it's told in first person. So let's see what it says on the back of the book about this. If you needed more information, which I didn't, I was like, I heard Nancy Drew goes hashtag van life, and I was like, sign me up, this sounds crazy. Dear Diary, George won a contest to drive a travel influencer's van from Chicago to Los Angeles, so now she, Bess, and I get to experience the best of hashtag van life for a week. I was excited about building campfires under the stars and driving past gorgeous views, but the three of us in one vehicle is starting to feel claustrophobic, and problems with the van keep delaying our progress. Could someone be trying to sabotage our trip? Or am I so used to solving mysteries that I'm starting to see villains where there are none? Without further ado, let's hit the road, I suppose, to use a fitting metaphor. The first kind of odd gripe I have with this book, and this is, again, from me being too Nancy Drew pilled, I think, is in her opening diary entry, she says that I'm not the kind of girl you might call outdoorsy. I think hotels exist for a reason. If you examine the canon, of Nancy Drew, that is not her. That is not Nancy. She, doesn't give a fig about living in the lap of luxury. Mysteries and adventure are always her priorities. There have been countless stories where she's been an outdoorsy girl. So I was like, okay, kind of a weird take. I guess they're trying to make her relatable to kids, but it's like, a lot of kids are outdoorsy, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a nitpicky thing from me. I totally recognize that. It get better from there, just from being fucking stupid. But I also will say, I genuinely enjoyed myself. I think the writing of this book is not that bad. It's just, I find the idea of a Nancy Drew van life book where they're TikTokers is... Do I even need to say anything more? It starts with Bess and George together being like, oh, George said she had some big news to share with us. What could possibly be the big news? They go over to George's house and she has a video up on her computer screen. On screen, a pretty blonde woman in a slightly dented straw hat and a boho dress was resting her hand on the shoulder of a guy with long brown hair and a bushy beard. So these are the hashtag vanlife influencers. Their names are Matt and Sammy. They recently posted about this contest where, like the back of the book said, they want to get a fan to drive their van across the country for them. It's basically like a contest to get them free labor. And George has been in the hashtag vanlife pipeline. She's firmly inserted inside that pipeline, like she's like a little gator in a sewage pipe. Imagine being able to live wherever you want. No commute, few possessions, cooking your meals outside. Imagine how free you feel. They call it hashtag van life. ... Such a wistful ... at the end of that sentence. This whole thing about George wanting to like live a simple life and get back to the land had me wondering, like, maybe the next Nancy Drew book will be George's hashtag tradwife arc. Lord, I hope not. And I really don't think that would happen, but then again, I didn't think there'd be a Nancy Drew book about van life either. Sorry, hashtag van life. So George has won this contest. All we ask, Sammy said, is that you bring a friend or two and document your whole trip. All the Matt and Sammy subscribers will love seeing a newbie fall in love with hashtag van life. This contest sounds like a nightmare because you would have to pay me to be a TikTok vids van life hashtag van life influencer for a week. And it would not be cheap. I am a luxury few can afford. That sounds excruciating. And Bess and Nancy also agree. One of Bess's protestations about going on this trip is that she apparently is attending River Heights University, which, first of all, I thought was interesting because I had honestly assumed that the girls in this one were like middle school age, like 13 or something. That's the impression I get from the art on the covers, and I think they're also aimed at, ages 8 to 12. So I was like, okay, they're around the same age, probably, or as the kids reading it. But no, they're in university, they're fully teenagers, probably 18. And in fact, the class that Bess is so worried about missing is a poetry class, which I also thought was really interesting because I don't think I've read that as an interest for Bess in any of the books, and usually they tend to keep the characters like fairly consistent, but obviously they're imagining some growth for them. So I thought it was really interesting that Bess was starting to pursue poetry, because in the past, like in the original series, she's all about fashion, and then in like the early 2000s, they're like, well, we gotta make this character have a little bit more depth. What's like the opposite of fashion? Okay, she's a mechanic now. Because that was like the early 2000s idea of a strong female character, one who wears frilly dresses while she fixes her car. But then it goes on further to explain that the reason Bess is taking this poetry class is not necessarily because she has an interest in poetry, it's because she has an interest in songwriting. And she thinks this is going to, like, improve her songwriting. I feel like I've learned so many new things about Bess. It's like, you know, I have a childhood friend that I've grown up with my whole life, and suddenly she has like a whole new unexpected interest. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a really interesting thing. And Nancy says, I would never go camping for more than 2 days, which again harks back to what she was saying in her diary entry about, you know, I'm not an outdoorsy girl. It's like, again, why? 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 Because historically she has been. Is it, again, just to be relatable in some way, or is it just there to create, like, interpersonal tension? I think, honestly, that it's the latter. I feel like if they'd thought about it a bit more, they maybe could have thought of a more interesting way to create that tension without kind of rewriting Nancy's character in a weird way. I don't know. Let me know what you think about that, because I think it's odd and unnecessary. George is, like, pleading with her friends She's like, please, this might be my only chance to try out van life and see if I really like it. I'm too young to rent an RV. But she's old enough to drive this van. She's trusted to drive this precious #van. I feel like I would have put like an age restriction on my #van life contest and made sure that people were old enough to be able to like rent an RV. George has had no experience driving anything probably more than a Honda Civic. But because they're such good friends, of course, Nancy and Bess cave and agree to join George on her #van life journey. Flash forward to the first day of the journey. They have the van. I don't know how they got the van. They haven't actually met Matt and Sammy in person, but they're on another video call with them. Matt says, the most important thing, content, italicized. We need you guys to document every stage of your trip with some fun, engaging videos. We're handing over our brand to you for the next 7 days, guys. So with the idea of content and branding in mind, before they set off, the girls make a short little vid. The three of us stood on the lawn with the van in the shot to make our video for Matt and Sammy's page. It started out with George saying, today, 3 van life newbies are heading out on the open road for the first time. We're going to see the beauty of this country close up, driving from Chicago to LA and hitting all the most fun roadside attractions along the way. I'm George Fain, and these are my best friends in the world, Bess Marvin and Nancy Drew. Are you ready, guys? She angled the camera at me. Yes, I yelled, with what I hoped was proper enthusiasm. George chuckled. Okay, Nancy's coming in hot. How about you, Bess? Bess smiled. Well, I'm not what you call outdoorsy, but I'm really excited for everything except that tiny bathroom. George immediately posts the video. They got on the road, but they haven't been driving for 5 minutes before they got a call from freaking Matt and Sammy. Could you pull over? Sammy instructed. I wanted to have a quick chat. You know it's not gonna be good when she opens the conversation with that. We just saw your new video. Did you watch that video before you posted it? George naturally doesn't see anything wrong with it, but Sammy says, the bathroom comment? George frowned. You mean Bess's joke about the compost toilet? Sammy said. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, the company that makes those toilets is kind of one of our sponsors. So they wouldn't appreciate your shitty joke, Bess. I think she really should have mentioned something that important ahead of time. Yeah, I don't think that's their fault at all. But Sammy is like, can you re-record that? So they pile out of the van. They've just started going. They re-record this freaking TikTok video. And then on the road again. But again, they've not been driving for 5 minutes before they see a warning light flashing on the #van's dashboard. It's the low oil light. So they pull into like a service station. And the people at the service station tell Nancy, Bess, and George that it has an oil leak, in fact, and that they will be needing to continuously top off the oil if they still want to keep going with this trip. So things are off to a bit of a bumpy start for our #van life girls. So they call up Matt and Sammy again to be like, hey, we noticed this problem with the #van, and what Matt is concerned about, he's like, you guys left the road? You're on a tight itinerary, babes. What are you doing? You gotta get to Omaha, okay? And then he says, yeah, sorry, I guess we should have mentioned that. The van has had an oil leak for a while now. Matt ends the call by saying, I know we asked you to document your whole trip, but I don't think this little issue is worthy of a post, right? Right, guys? You don't need to tell the fans about this one, this little oopsie. Also, sorry if you can hear my cat eating in the background. At least you can see him, so it's not like a weird chomping noise in the background. A weird, unexplained chomping noise. 5 minutes later, driving again. Bess is like, oh no! And they have to make another stop. This is because one of Bess's stipulations about going on this trip was that she'd be able to bring her laptop so she can finish her poetry paper. She's writing her paper on her laptop while they're driving along, which I am incredibly impressed by that. I would be so car sick. But her laptop is not charging at the van's outlet. So they have to go to like a Best Buy and get a USB charger. Because of all these missteps along the way, the gang are forced to stop at a campground earlier than on their scheduled itinerary, which obviously Matt and Sammy are not happy about, but you know, c'est la vie. That's how it goes sometimes. Que sera, sera. So we are now 50 pages into Vans and Villains. And at this point, I was wondering, where's the mystery? This is a Nancy Drew book. Nancy Drew is famously, I don't know if you knew this, a detective. So, where's the mystery? And that, my friends, is a question we are going to continue to wonder about and ask ourselves. But there's like a little sprinkling of suspense, of intrigue in this chapter, because the next morning, Nancy wakes up and discovers their tires appear to have been slashed in the night. And she finds a little footprint on the ground as well. Hi, Ham. Smacking your lips right near the microphone? That's some nice ASMR. So I took a pause here and I'm like, well, who could have slashed their tires? And you know what I think? I think it was probably the influencers, like clout chasing or something. I think that might be the resolution to this story. Or like, that's what I thought at the time. That was like immediately what jumped to my mind, because like, they don't know anyone else. No one else has been introduced. Really, really compelling mystery. Sure gonna stump Nancy for about 150 more pages though. However, Bess and George are like, Nancy, you're imagining things. I'm pretty sure you just ran over these rocks on our campsite last night and didn't notice, you klutz, you clown. I can't believe you're trying to play off your own mistake as some suspicious thing, you paranoid freako. And that will continue to be a trend throughout this book, which I really didn't enjoy. Especially George. George comes off as excessively unlikable in this book. She is constantly like, Nancy, you're so paranoid. I can't believe you're trying to make this about you and your stupid mystery solving, Nancy. And guess what? It ends up being a mystery. Fuck you, George. They also make the mistake of checking the comments on the videos they've posted thus far. This is my personal favorite. These Beckys should go back to Sephora and let the real hashtag van lifers have their shot. Beckys? I feel like telling them to go back to Sephora and calling them Beckys in the same sentence is such an interesting contradiction, because I feel like Beckys is like outdated millennial slang, but telling them to go back to Sephora, that is like as contemporary as a van life influencer, you know? Sephora kids. So they mentioned earlier in the story that they're going to hit up a bunch of roadside attractions, and they actually go to visit a bunch of real life roadside attractions. And the first one of those they visit is Carhenge. It's kind of exactly what it sounds like if you're not familiar. A bunch of cars stacked to look like Stonehenge and painted gray. I would go. I love a stupid roadside attraction. I think it's a very funny one for them to choose. Ghostwriter of this book was like, well, first of all, they've gotta go to Carhenge. George obviously films it. She says, what a time to be alive. You can tell the person who wrote this is chronically online, and I appreciate that. I feel like this book could not have been written by someone who was not chronically online. When they get back to the car after touring the sights of Carhenge, they see a suspicious guy in a green baseball cap lurking around the van, and when they approach, they discover the door is wide open and there's some smashed mugs on the floor. And Bess is like, guys, I might have forgotten to lock the door. George is pissy. Nancy's suspicious. And George is like, Nancy, stop being so damn paranoid. No one except Matt and Sammy knew this was on our itinerary. Yeah, George, maybe think about that a little bit. Maybe just pause on that statement for a moment. She continues, Nancy, I know our trip had a bumpy start. And with your history, maybe it's easier to assume there's some nefarious plan causing all this trouble, and not just our mistakes and inexperience. With my history? I sputtered. George, I'm a teenage sleuth, not a trauma victim. The dialogue in this actually is Pretty great. Pretty quippy. They get to their next campsite, have an uneventful night, and the next day they're looking at the info about the roadside attraction they're due to visit today, which is the Overland Trail Museum, and George is excited because there's a two-headed calf there, which I found so relatable. I would also be like, I'm most excited to see this two-headed calf. Who doesn't love that poem? And also, who doesn't love a weird oddity in a museum? So they go there, see the two-headed calf. George films it. "This was not on my bingo card," George said to the camera. Again, such a chronically online statement, but also, it was. George, that morning when you were looking at the information for the roadside attraction, you were like, oh, I can't wait to see the two-headed calf. So it literally was on your bingo card. This part tickled me. As Bess and I were leaving, the lady at the cash register handed us each a wooden nickel. My Millie Strathorn instincts immediately activated. Don't take any wooden nickels, young ladies. But they do, fools that they are. They take the wooden nickels. 5 minutes later, they're on the road again. Once again, disaster strikes. The faulty USB outlet has fried Bess's laptop. And George, because this is her personality in this book, I guess, is antagonistic about it and extremely defensive about Matt and Sammy and everything about #vanlife. So they have to pull over again, find a computer repair store, and Nancy finds Bess inside, staring at the door the tech guy had gone through, with the anxious expression of a mother who just sent her baby in for heart surgery, which I thought was an amazing line to come out of a Nancy Drew book. Like, if you told me that was a line from a modern, lit fic, weird girl book, I would have absolutely believed it. But it's from Nancy Drew, Vans and Villains. Then they have to go crawling back to Matt and Sammy on the phone. And of course, Matt and Sammy, who also suck, because everyone who likes van life apparently sucks in this book. Matt's like, you shouldn't really be using the van as a workspace anyway. That's not what van life is about. And unfortunately, Nancy doesn't say this out loud, because I think she really should, but she thinks to herself, Matt's claim was a little weird. Hadn't I seen posts from them about how decked out the van was? How easy it was to work on the road? Didn't they run their own social media accounts from the van? But, you know, Matt and Sammy, nothing is their problem. They're not taking accountability for anything, even though they didn't have to run this contest. Like, they literally did not have to do that. They did not have to sign responsibility of their van over to an 18-year-old girl who's never driven a van before, who's probably only been on the road for a maximum 2 years. I don't know, guys. I feel like you need to take some responsibility for this for yourself. Then Bess threatens to go home, which I think is completely fair. This trip has been like an absolute disaster so far. Other than Carhenge. Carhenge was just fun. Bess and George get into a big shouting match about how Matt and Sammy need to take accountability, and George is like, Matt and Sammy can do nothing wrong. What are you talking about, Bess? It's all your fault. And then Bess is like, what kind of person gives a delivery job as a prize and makes no arrangements for the prize winner's safety? She's making a really good point as well. Like, so many things have gone wrong. So many things could have gone wrong. Like, they knew about the leaking oil thing. They could have died. I don't know. Maybe they couldn't. I'm not a mechanic expert. Bess agrees to continue with the #vanlife journey. So then they arrive at their next campsite, which is in Utah. Nancy and Bess go to take a shower in the little shower block. And Nancy says, I waited while Bess went through her usual nighttime beauty routine, including facial cleanser, toner, night cream, eye cream, hand cream, and lip mask. She took off her towel and put her hair up in 2 tight braids for texture when I wake up. Then she brushed her teeth, then flossed, then rinsed with mouthwash. And I think this is such a good update for modern Bess that she's like a skincare girly. I think that just makes so much sense with Bess as a character and is such an insightful, modern upgrade for her. So many books that try to be like contemporary kind of miss the mark in actually knowing what contemporary teenagers are into or do. And this one felt authentic to, you know, the chronically online TikTok beauty influencer obsessed teenage girl. They have got some more hate comments. Can't wait till these bimbos are gone and Matt and Sammy are back. Bimbos? I can't believe I read the word bimbos in a Nancy Drew book and that it was in fact talking about Nancy herself. They called Nancy Drew a bimbo. I mean, I guess they couldn't make Nancy an outdoorsy girl because then they couldn't have people writing comments calling her a bimbo if she knew what she was doing. Nancy starts to formulate a theory that maybe one of these hate commenters is behind all their misfortunes, and that somehow Matt and Sammy's itinerary might have been leaked. At the campsite, she also discovers another footprint in their campsite, which matches the same footprint she found in their campsite way back on the first night when their tires got slashed. And of course, Bess and George are like, Nancy, you're so kooky. It's all just your imagination. You're so paranoid. You're so paranoid. You're seeing so many things that aren't really there. It's all just your imagination. There's no great conspiracy, Nancy. There's no mystery here. Just the simple, everyday misfortunes of #van life. It's really as simple as that. They head back on the road and end up stopping at a Mexican restaurant for lunch in a small town called Youngville. Nancy orders a virgin margarita, which I love for her. And the girls start excitedly chatting about the next parts of their trip and what they're gonna do along the way. The next stop is planned is Vegas, so they've got a lot of fun ideas of what they're gonna do in Vegas. And then they get talking about what they're gonna do in LA. Bess is like, we should go to Disneyland, guys. And then Nancy's like, but what if we want to do a studio tour instead? Or a tour of the stars' houses? Maybe we'll run into Pedro Pascal. Bess blanched. Pedro Pascal was her favorite. This was utterly baffling to me. I don't know, maybe it's not that weird to include the name of a celebrity in a Nancy Drew book. It just feels like it's gonna automatically date it. But, I mean, there are a lot of things dating this book. We'll get to that. I have, like, a few words to say about that. It's like if they'd written in a Nancy Drew book from the 1990s that Bess was crushing on, like, Patrick Swayze. If you're a kid reading that book in 2026, are you gonna know who Patrick Swayze is? I don't think so. It's just a very weirdly specific pop culture reference that I think is completely unnecessary and, like I say, really is gonna date the book. That might not be a concern for some authors, but like Nancy Drew is a character in a property that's known to have staying power. Like, it's almost been 100 years since the first Nancy Drew book was published, and they're still writing these things. People are still reading them. The original books are still stocked in bookshelves. Well, the 1960s rewrite, but you know what I mean. So I feel like it really doesn't make sense to include a reference to a contemporary actor. I feel like I didn't fully articulate my thoughts about that. They're not 100% fully formed, but it just felt very odd to me that they'd include that. And Bess is so excited about these future plans of what they're gonna do in their next destinations. And George says, Bess, are you saying you might be into #van life if it weren't for the van? Bess nodded brightly. I think I might. Next page, they go back to the parking lot. The van is gone. Bess, you got your wish. So now they are stuck in the small town of Youngville. Unfortunately, the police aren't very much help. There's not a lot of crime in this small town of Youngville, Utah. In fact, they say there's no crime. And yet they have a police force. If there's ever a police force that needed defunding, it's the Youngville police. The one thing that the police guy is able to help out with is that he has a cousin in town who owns a B&B. It's run by my cousin Mateo and his husband, and I froze like a little rabbit in the headlights. Gays? Gays in my Nancy Drew book? How delightful. It might be the bare minimum, but I appreciated it nonetheless. As you might have figured out by now, the loss of the van also means the loss of basically all their possessions. George seems pretty bummed out, so Nancy's like, oh, maybe she's upset about losing all her things. Don't worry, George. I'm sure you'll be able to find all your favorite t-shirts again. Even that one with the kitten that says, don't test me. It's like, is this 2010? This book is just a funny mashup of references which feel disastrously current and those which feel oddly outdated. Graphic tees with kittens with a cute little saying on them? I don't think someone's wearing that in, like, 2026. I think they'd be wearing that in 2010. They'd have gotten that at the local Blue Notes, you know? Do people still even go to Blue Notes? I think there's one still open in my local mall, which is baffling to me. I also don't know, maybe Blue Notes is a Canadian store? I don't know. I kind of always assumed it was mainly an American thing that started in the US. Let me know if you have Blue Notes where you are. That's where I got all my stupid, cheesy little graphic tees when I was in middle school. I had one with Snoopy on it playing a guitar and said, "My boyfriend's in a band." I didn't have a boyfriend, but I had a crush on a guy who played the bass. That was why I bought it. My friend had one with, like, the Smurfs on it, and it said, "You have 7 friend requests." We still laugh about that one. So good. Okay, sorry, that was so nostalgic for a second. Okay, so once again, they're forced to call Matt and Sammy, a painful exercise in humiliation by this point, because you just know Matt and Sammy are gonna blame this on the girls. It's all their fault. Even though it's like, what could they do? They literally left the van in the parking lot. They wouldn't have expected to get stolen. They're in Youngville, Utah. So they finally get around to telling Matt and Sammy that the van is gone. And, predictably, they don't react well. Matt leaned toward the screen, and now his voice was low and menacing. "You'd better get that van back," he said. "That's $150,000 van. Do you girls have the money to pay us back for that?" Bess is like, "Isn't it insured?" And he's like, "Yeah, but that's not the point." Because he's a dick. "If you can't find it, we will sue all 3 of you for lost income. The van is our whole business." Are you freaking kidding me, bro? You made the decision to hand it over to 3 strangers. Like, you gotta think about the consequences of that. What could happen? They'd never even met them in real life. They hadn't even met. That's bananas, bro. And he's gonna sue 3 poor little teenagers who entered his freaking van life contest, #van life contest. This freaking guy. But Nancy is like, "Don't worry, I'm Nancy Drew, and solving mysteries is kind of my brand." Okay, so Nancy goes into full online investigation mode. She's looking at Matt and Sammy's page, and she finds that Matt actually has a few other social media accounts on vids, one focused on cooking segments and another on home decorating. He looked a little more polished in these videos, less outdoorsy, more corporate. Neither one had anywhere near the following of Matt and Sammy's #vanlife page. I guess Matt is trying to diversify. She also notices under a picture of Sammy on the Matt and Sammy account that someone has commented, "You are gorgeous." Do you really need that Matt guy? The username? Secret Stud 42. Hold on, changing my channel name immediately. And Sammy surprisingly replies, "Oh, you're so sweet. Some days I feel like I could make it on my own. Lol. Marriage in a van can be hard." And then Secret Stud responds to that, "DMing you, ... And the public conversation ended there. Hooey mama, what is going on? Does Sammy have a Secret Stud 42? Like, is she actually letting some creepo message her? That's such a weird comment to respond to in that way. Everything about that is weird. And Nancy observes that it was the first crack I'd seen in Matt and Sammy's "everything is perfect and we're so in love" brand. They gushed about each other in their postings. The other was so perfect, so sensitive. Their twin flame. Their soulmate. Sorry. If you see me posting online and calling someone my twin flame, It's a cry for help. And then Nancy goes to look into the other contest entrants who didn't win, and she finds that a couple of them have left negative comments. So Nancy notices one particular comment from this guy with their username, Andy Loves Cheese. Nancy is trying to determine how she can figure out if this guy, Andy Loves Cheese, is the guy who's been sabotaging them. And then she remembers the green baseball cap that was worn by the guy who was poking around their van at Carhenge. So she asks Bess, who apparently knows these things, what baseball teams wear green caps? And Bess says maybe the Oakland Athletics. And then Nancy does some more scrolling through Andy Loves Cheese's page and finds out Andy Loves Cheese was an Oakland Athletics fan. That inspired me to take a more careful look at all his posts, and a few pages in I found more evidence. A photo of him grinning on what looked like a wooded path, wearing hiking boots with the brand name clearly showing. A quick Google search told me that the brand had treads that matched the marks I'd seen at both campsites. I, at this point, was actually like, this has got to be a red herring. There's no way this, like, rabid fan is the one after them, because I don't think he could have got a hold of Matt and Sammy's itinerary. It's gotta be Matt and Sammy. This is page 150 out of 200 that Andy Loves Cheese gets introduced, by the way. So Nancy goes to relay this info she's discovered about Andy Loves Cheese to Matt and Sammy, but when she calls them, only Sammy is there on the video call, and she says that Matt is spending some time with his brother who lives in Milwaukee. There's no way he's spending time with his brother in Milwaukee. There is every way that he is stalking these girls and sabotaging the van. And Nancy is like, okay, Sammy, did anyone else know about our itinerary? And Sammy says, just Lila. Who's Lila? She's our personal assistant, Sammy said. Introduced on page 155. Okay. So they got Lila's number from Sammy, and Nancy calls her and notices that there is a road noise in the background, and every so often I'd hear a male voice, and I'm like, it's Matt. It's 100% Matt. She says, I'm with my boyfriend, actually. And Lila is oddly evasive. So as they're packing to leave Youngville, a note is slipped under the door of their hotel room, their gay B&B, which I think really shows the hand of these saboteurs. It's like, at this point, Bess and George, you cannot deny these people know where you are and are following you. This is evidence. The note says, if you want to chat about it, come to Big Rock Candy Mountain tomorrow at 8 p.m. No police. What a whimsical place for, like, this threatening meeting. It's all gonna go down at Big Rock Candy Mountain. Blood is going to be spilled at Big Rock Candy Mountain. There's an RV park at Big Rock Candy Mountain, and unfortunately for the girls, it is mainly deserted. But they find the one RV that they're looking for, and inside is Andy Loves Cheese, which I was genuinely surprised about. I like I said, I really thought he was a red herring, but no, he's like sincerely one of the culprits in this case, which again, I think is not great writing for a mystery if you introduce one of your main culprits in the last 50 pages. You wouldn't see Agatha Christie doing that. This is, very much more like an adventure story at its heart than a mystery, I have to be honest. But Nancy realizes that Andy Loves Cheese is not alone, that there are someone or someones in the back of the van, the RV that they're in. So she flings open the door and reveals Matt and Lila. I knew it. Actually, I thought it was Matt and Sammy working together, especially because Lila, again, was introduced in the last 45 pages. Two of the main culprits are introduced in, like, the last, quarter of the book? My math is bad. Not acceptable. And Nancy is like, this is Lila, Matt and Sammy's personal assistant, and I suspect his mistress. Gagged. Utterly gagged when I read that. I was like, I never expected to read the word mistress in a Nancy Drew book in this context, but it's also such an old-fashioned term that it's so funny. he was having relations with this woman. And Matt's motivations are apparently that he wants to move on from #vanlife, which is why he had started up those other accounts, and he wants to focus more on becoming a solo influencer, and then, you know, he and Lila could be together. I think that's a pretty big scandal. If he, like, divorced his, like, van life partner, his #vanlife partner, and their whole brand had been about how they love each other so much, how they're twin flames, and then, like, started seeing their personal assistant, and also, like, entirely moved away from van life. That would not look good. They would be having a feast on the subreddit r/Matt and Sammy. They'd be going crazy. Oh, and Andy Loves Cheese motivation is just that he's, like, Matt and Sammy's #1 fan. So it's baffling that he's like, yeah, I'm gonna help Matt as he, like, actively betrays Sammy and cheats on her with their personal assistant. It's like, if you're a Matt and Sammy fan, you'd be a fan of both of them together, but Matt is like, hey, my biggest fan, do you want to come help me on my mission to absolutely tank my personal brand and disband our social media account that you're the biggest fan of? And Andy's like, yeah, sign me up. It's silly. And I guess Lila's motivation is that she's in love with Matt, I guess. Oh, also Matt insinuates that he's gonna kill them. And again, that's really not gonna look good for you, Matt. You literally, okay, his master plan, his master plan was to hire or, like, find 3 teenagers to create content for him, and then he was gonna be like, okay, and then partway through their content creation journey, they're just gonna disappear. Again, that's gonna look real freaking suspicious, Matt. That's not gonna look good. That's gonna be a major scandal for your brand. Okay, but Nancy and Bess and George are not taking this lying down. They are not gonna get killed by a #vanlife influencer and a guy who calls himself Andy Loves Cheese online. Bess lunged at Andy and aimed her fingers at his eyes, while George bolted across the RV's kitchen, grabbed the arm that held the taser — Andy has a taser — and bit him hard on the wrist. These feral girls, I love them so much, hell yeah. But unfortunately, their combined girl power isn't quite enough, and they all get knocked out, and they wake up tied up in the original #van. And Matt's like, well, you know what's gonna happen now? I'm gonna drive this van over a cliff with the 3 of you inside. And it's like, okay. So, what if someone finds the van, Matt, and finds that there are 3 skeletons bound with rope inside it, or worse, 3 rotting corpses tied up with rope, and then they do ID checks and find out they're the 3 winners of your van life contest inside your van, your #van. Oh my god, he is not making this through. If you want to rebrand, I'm sure there are easy ways to do it. If you want to divorce your wife, just do it. Fortunately, Chekhov's oil leak comes in clutch at this very moment, and Bess, the mechanic, convinces the kidnappers that they need to stop at the service station and get this sorted out. So they end up at a truck stop, and Nancy is able to untie her gag and yell, "Help, we're being kidnapped!" And it draws everyone at the truck stop to them. It is so over for Matt and Lila and Andy Loves Cheese. The subreddit is gonna go rabid over this. This is even better than if Matt had been successfully able to rebrand. Like, imagine if, like, your favorite social media influencer was, like, arrested for taking hostage, like, the 3 teenage winners of his, like, a very public social media contest because he'd been planning to kill them and run off with his mistress, who was his personal assistant. Oh my god, not so stuff. And of course, George makes a video essay exposing all of Matt and Sammy's misdeeds. Well, maybe mainly Matt's. I mean, Sammy is just kind of a bad person. Matt is a real life criminal. She makes a full-on video essay. They give us like the script of most of her video essay in the final chapter. There's a graphic of cartoon bars slamming down on photos of Matt and Andy. But the drama is that Lila had sneaked out while they were in the van at the truck station, and they never found her. A cliffhanger, much like what was going to happen to George and Nancy and Bess if Matt had got his way. And it ends with them taking another trip in Sammy's van. But like the positive is like, we would not make a single video about our trip. This one would be just for us. Yeah, that was the worst part about your trip. Filming the videos. And I love this. In the back, there's an ad for the Nancy Drew games, which I didn't even know they still did. Like in the Girl Detective series, which was published in the early 2000s, they would often have ads for the Nancy Drew games in the back. And I love that they're still doing it. There's like pictures from Mr. the Seven Keys, which I think is so cute. But yeah, that was Vans and Villains. An absolutely gonzo, whack-a-mole Nancy Drew book. I started this video by reading out the first sentence of Vans and Villains, and I didn't at the time read out the line that follows it, which is, have you ever heard of hashtag van life? It's an influencer trend, kind of self-explanatory. And I think this sentence sums up the main problem with Vans and Villains. It dates itself by virtue of its very premise in a more damning way than mentions of Sephora and Pedro Pascal. It was already dated at the time of its publication due to the fleeting nature of trends, online trends. I feel like van life had its height in the cultural online zeitgeist at least 2 years ago, which, to be fair, was probably at the time the author started writing this book. Already, hashtag van life isn't as much a thing anymore. It's just kind of sad to me that a book that released this year already feels so outdated when Nancy Drew books shouldn't ever feel outdated. There's something to the best Nancy Drew books that is kind of timeless. They may mention contemporary, technology and brands, like in the early 2000s, Nancy's, sending faxes, she's got her flip phone, she drives a Mustang, all that jazz. But at the end of the day, there's nothing in them that will reduce your enjoyment or a child's enjoyment of reading those books at basically like any time in their lives. There are a few exceptions that obviously try to take advantage of the current trends in technology. Like I have previously read Crime at the Chat Cafe about an internet cafe, which was delightful, but again, a child reading that in 2026 would be laughing so hard at all of the by now antiquated concepts in that book. And I fear the same thing is going to happen to Vans and Villains. In fact, it is already happening. I was laughing throughout this book, and not always at moments that were meant to be funny. Let me know if you've read this or what you thought of it from my little summary here. And also, I think it'd be fun. It's just let me know what the weirdest idea you have for a Nancy Drew book is. The most stupidly contemporary concept for a Nancy Drew book. And I'll leave you with these final words of wisdom. Hashtag van live, hashtag van laugh, hashtag van love.